All right, thanks everyone for being here on this beautiful sunny morning. We are joined by legal services advocates from around New York State and my colleague, Assemblymember Michaelle Solages, who I worked with in the Assembly for several years. So everyone here is a member of the New York Legal Services Coalition, and they represent nonprofit organizations that provide free and low-cost legal services for people in New York State. It doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter what your background is. It doesn't matter how much money you have. Everybody deserves the same level of legal representation. These organizations help clients with civil legal problems that affect their basic needs: food, shelter, access to home care. This is a critical part of New York State's legal system. 40 years ago, the legislature created the IOLA fund to make sure that they have the funding that they need. Here's how it works. When an attorney opens an account for a client, something like a house closing, your attorney gets the earnest deposit. Where does that money go? Well, it's got to go in what's called a client escrow account. And the money sits in that escrow account, and every little bit accumulates a small amount of interest. That interest is pooled together, and it's used for the common purpose of providing funding for civil legal services in New York State. It's an important source of revenue, and we want to make sure our legal services organizations can count on that money being there. Remember, it's private money being put in by lawyers across New York State for a common purpose of serving people with their civil legal services needs. So Assemblymember Solages and I have introduced a bill to help sure that this critical funding remains available for the purpose it was created for. This bill will allow IOLA to fund its grants without having to go through the red tape of the New York State budget process. It's not a radical idea. This change will actually bring IOLA's administrative processes in line with many of the other New York settlement funds, reserve funds, and special funds. And more importantly, it'll help ensure that the fund is only used for its intended purposes, making civil legal services available for vulnerable New Yorkers. I've worked with Assemblymember Solages on several issues over the years. She is a great representative. She's not afraid to tackle important and hard issues, and it's my pleasure to bring up Assemblymember Michaelle Solages.
Thank you so much, Senator. From Buffalo to Long Island, it's always a pleasure to work with the senator, especially on an issue that's vitally important for our communities. We see that income inequality has grown vast amounts across the state. We're going through an affordability crisis where people are struggling. And we know that legal service sometimes can be deemed as a luxury, but in our state, it's a necessity. And we have to ensure that every New Yorker has access to legal services, because we've seen that when you have access to legal services, whether you're fighting an eviction process or going through a civil proceeding, when you have an attorney or representation with you, you are better off. And so during the budget process, we saw this money being swept against the advice and consult of many of these civil legal groups behind us. We realized, Senator and I and these groups realized that we need to ensure that we're protecting this fund. It's been 40 years we've had this fund, and it's had its struggles. Due to the 2008 crash, the fund has been severely hurt, and it's taken 12 years to get back to the 2007 levels, and now we're kind of playing kabuki with the fund. This is just a wrong move by the executive, and we want to make sure that future generations, future governors, future legislatures don't have this option. And so I'm proud to sponsor this legislation with the senator. I look forward to getting this done because it's vitally important that we protect the opportunity for New Yorkers to have representation in these legal proceedings, especially if they are disproportionately impacted by economic factors. So thank you so much. I'm going to kick it off to one great organization that I know fights for the average New Yorker, the CEO of Empire Justice Center and the president of New York Legal Service Coalition, Kristen Brown.
Thank you so much. I am really proud to be here representing the New York Legal Services Coalition and Empire Justice Center. Our coalition is the state association for civil legal services providers, and our members, as you've heard, provide civil legal services to low-income and marginalized New Yorkers in every part of this great state. We represent victims of domestic violence, those facing homelessness, those who experience economic instability due to job loss, medical debt, and disability. We're here today to support Senator Ryan and Assemblymember Solages as the co-sponsors of this legislation because it's absolutely essential that New York makes it crystal clear that the governor and the legislature are in agreement that IOLA funds will never again be diverted for any other purpose than civil legal services and under the direction of the IOLA Board of Trustees, no matter how worthy the cause. This year made history. This year's budget made history, but not in a good way, unfortunately. The diversion of IOLA funds to the Department of Law and the Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance represents, as you've heard, the first time in IOLA's 40-year history that money has been taken out of this fund and not directed by the Board of Trustees. And as you'll hear, it represents a disastrous precedent. Leading up to the final budget, we joined with our vast legal community here in New York, including the New York State Bar Association, the New York City Bar Association, county bar associations, and law firms big and small across the state in opposition to sweeping IOLA funds. Why is this so important? It's because New York faces a dual crisis in civil legal services. We have an estimated $1 billion civil justice gap, and that's a low estimate of what it would take to provide some degree of assistance to low-income individuals who are in need but can't afford an attorney. We also face a staffing crisis. Our Legal Services Coalition estimates that civil legal aid organizations pay anywhere from 20 to 75% less than their government counterparts who are doing substantially similar work. Most organizations pay between 30 and 35% less for attorneys. And so as a result, we often end up training attorneys who move on to higher salaries working for the government. They make more money, they have a government pension. These are systemic problems that our state needs to fix, and I look forward to working with our partners in the legislature and the governor's office in fixing that. But IOLA's funding is part of the solution. More funds, more services, higher salaries. It's the best thing we can do for low-income and marginalized New Yorkers here in our great state. Any dime diverted out of the civil justice system is just compounding our problems. So we call on the legislature and the governor to join with us. Let's pass this bill this session and make it clear that New York is committed to access to justice. Thank you. And I'll now pass the microphone on to Jessica Rose, my compatriot, who is Executive Director of the Brooklyn Legal Services Corporation A. Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Jessie Rose, and I am the Executive Director of Brooklyn Legal Services Corp. A and co-vice chair of the New York Legal Services Coalition Steering Committee. The use of the IOLA fund in this year's budget to cover HOP and eviction prevention funding results ultimately in a cut in overall funding of civil legal services for low-income New Yorkers. Funding for civil legal services should be increasing rather than decreasing as the need continues to be so great. The sweep was an alarming move by the governor and a terrible precedent, which we urgently need to ensure does not reoccur in the future. IOLA's revenue, as you've heard, comes from interest earned on lawyer trust accounts, not tax revenue. The legal framework of the IOLA funds is based on the funds supporting civil legal services for low-income New Yorkers, and only that. If the money is swept for other purposes, however critical, we risk the undermining of the ethical basis of the IOLA fund and turning the IOLA fund into a government slush fund. If the funds are not being used as directed, it could become a huge disincentive for private attorneys to utilize IOLA escrow accounts. It could end the IOLA fund ultimately for New York State. We protect the stability of the fund and strongly support the proposed legislation. I now turn the mic to Gretchen Gonzalez, CEO of Erie County Bar Association Volunteer Lawyers Project.
Hello, my name is Gretchen Gonzalez. I am the Executive Director of the Erie County Bar Association Volunteer Lawyers Project. My organization, along with all IOLA-funded organizations, provide legal representation to people fighting for the basic necessities of life, for food, shelter, employment, access to health care. There's an IOLA-funded organization in every region of the state. And although we collectively served over 600,000 people last year, we're nowhere near meeting the need. Now is the time for the state to invest in legal services and protect this funding to help decrease the justice gap. We hope that both houses come together to support this bill and protect IOLA for years to come. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for coming together. I know you have to take time out of your day, which is usually serving clients, to come up here. But trust me that the work you're going to do up here advocating for these changes will make it so many other people can serve more clients. So thanks for your work, and thank you so much, Assemblymember Solages, for being with us today.